Hello everyone, welcome to another day in the clown decade, where the wins are rare, but hopefully as the leftists get more and more mental, people with the power will soon have enough and actually make decent changes in the world, whether it be through government or through Elon Musk buying out all the terrible companies. It's a bit of a side note, Elon Musk is backing Ron DeSantis, it looks like. It really looks like we'll get some change over in America because that's where it's more mental over in America compared to over here in Britain. We don't have the leftist Borg as bad as you do because it doesn't stick as well because they use the same arguments as America, but this isn't America. So shaming us for our history of slavery isn't actually as effective. But anyway, enough about that. We're here to talk about Britain, or more precisely, getting people out of Britain who shouldn't be here. So for those who don't know, the Home Office came up with a Rwanda asylum plan, and it was announced back in April, and it intends to take some asylum seekers who cross the channel to the UK on a one-way ticket to Rwanda to claim asylum there instead, and the government has said that the scheme would discourage others from crossing the channel, because obviously if you're paying money to come to Britain and you just sent over to Rwanda instead, you may as well just go to Rwanda straight away. And that's basically a one-paragraph summary of what the plan is. People who come over illegally will be sent over to Rwanda, obviously at government expense, because Rwandans want the asylum seekers because they believe they'd be useful for boosting the economy. And obviously general consensus in the UK, and part of the reason that the Tories were put in charge, was to put an end to this illegal immigration. Because Brits do generally believe in the rule of law, and if you cross a border illegally, then, well, you need to be punished for it somehow. Obviously, there are exceptions when it's the only choice that asylum seekers have, but if you're crossing the channel from France, let's be fair, you probably had a lot of opportunities to apply for asylum elsewhere before you came to Britain. So just so I was getting my hopes up on all this news, Rwanda flights grounded while Tories target human rights laws. In the Commons, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, said that she would not be deterred by setbacks in her plan to find migrants to Rwanda for processing. It's all well and good that she says that, but when it comes to most politicians these days, I'll believe it when I see some results. Priti Patel's Rwanda policy faces being delayed for months as ministers accept it would be a gamble to book another flight before the courts have given their ruling. Separately, ministers are planning an overhaul of European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, that will allow migrants due for removal only the narrowest possible exemption under Article 8 of the treaty, which protects an individual's right to a family and a private life. A government source said that an exemption being considered would be so narrow that it would allow migrants to remain only if a close relative was dying. The government is expected, however, to stop short of leaving the ECHR, despite Number 10 and Suella Braverman, the Attorney General, insisting all options are on the table in that overhaul of the Human Rights Act, which enshrines the conventions in UK law. Surprise, surprise, that was one of the first laws that Tony Blair put into the UK, and therefore is one of the first that we should get rid of. Because it's ridiculous that a sovereign country would ever put itself under the whims and laws of any foreign power, unless obviously it would agree to be part of an empire. And for those wondering that why, if you've left the EU, we're still in the European Convention on Human Rights, well, the reason is because that was set up before the EU, and we joined it separately than when we joined the EU, because, as was shown, we only signed it into law with the Human Rights Act, which we did in 1998. As I say, thanks to Tony Blair. So, just repeal that law, please. Because it's not like the European Convention on Human Rights is all bad, it's just most of the good we already have in laws anyway, so there's no point joining it. Because it's just another level of foreign sovereignty that we don't need. We have our own laws. And we have our own problems, because this first flight that the article has referred to, originally it had 137 migrants on, but due to massive interventions from our own Human Rights Court, that number was put down to about 10 or so, and then down again to 8, down again to 7, and those last 7 were put on the plane and ready for takeoff, and then nope, right at the end, the European Court of Human Rights comes in and says, oh no, those last 7, they're ours to deal with. Which is, I think, an important thing to point out at this point. A lot more of our problems are actually with our domestic laws, which, surprise, surprise, have come in post-Blair. Because the European Court on Human Rights, they've only come in and taken the last 7. You know, we're ignoring the other 130 who were taken in by our own court and by our own lawyers and things like that. So pivoting and blaming the ECHR isn't the best thing to do. It's a good thing to do, don't get me wrong, but there's bigger fish to fry within our own borders here, clearly. Because in the decade Tony Blair was Prime Minister, every year there was an average of 2,685 new laws. That was every year, which is the equivalent of almost 7.5 a day, or one every 3.25 hours. That's just insane. This is part of the reason people say Blair's decade was the end of a cultural revolution. Because at what other time do you see that many laws being put into a country? It's basically when there's been a massive communist takeover, or totalitarian takeover, I should say. And this is the result of it. We can't do anything anymore. The country has basically been halted, and now we are stuck with the illegal migrants, despite the fact they've broken the law, and it's perfectly reasonable to deport them. But no, apparently can't do that. But anyway, back to the article. The cabinet appears split after Theresa Coffey, the Work and Pensions Secretary, said leaving the ECHR was not on the table at all. Patel is also considering ways to limit migrants' ability to use non-slavery acts to avoid removal, after several of those originally due to be on Tuesday's Rwanda flight used the legislation to claim they were victims. The Home Secretary is said to be considering increasing the threshold of what constitutes modern slavery. A migrant can avoid removal if officials believe there are reasonable grounds for their claims to be a slavery victim. I'm also not sure if they're claiming to be slaves in Britain or if they're claiming to be slaves abroad, because obviously these laws are only really applicable within borders that the Queen controls. So if they were a slave in France, say, then it's not up to us to punish or compensate them for that crime, because it didn't happen in this country. But this is another issue. If you see in the newspaper Priti Patel is going to increasing the threshold of what it means to be a modern slave, that doesn't sound very good. And without knowing the details, I can't really say if I'm behind the idea or not. I'd obviously need to look into it a bit more, but a lot of people are just going to say, oh my god, she's basically going to make slavery legal again, even though it's not been legal in the UK since William the Conqueror. It's clearly just going to start an uproar. It's the way these things are framed, as usual. Patel told MPs in the Commons yesterday that the Home Office was going ahead with preparations for the next flight to Rwanda, though the failure of the first flight cost more than £300,000. Thanks, human rights lawyers. Government sources have said that the Home Office will not book another flight until it is sure it will not be grounded by judges in Strasbourg. We're not going to go ahead with something that's not going to work, an insider said, which is fair enough. But again, why are you focusing on Strasbourg? They stopped 7 people going, you know. We stopped, or our human rights lawyers stopped 130 people going. Clearly there's a bigger issue here. A Home Office official said that not a single migrant was expected to be deported to Rwanda this year after the decision on Tuesday by a judge at the European Court of Human Rights to grant injunctions blocking the flight. The High Court will hear a judicial review of the policy next month. Home Office officials believe that if campaigners lose the verdict, they will lodge appeals to the Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, which is another Blair thing that needs to go, and ultimately the European Court of Human Rights. In its 2-page decision, the court in Strasbourg said that the migrants should not be removed until 3 weeks after a judicial review of the policy was heard by UK courts. And this isn't a totally unexpected outcome. Clearly there were going to be legal battles about deporting people. So I'm not exactly against a judicial review into how this all works and making sure it's all done by the letter of the law. And after all that's done, this whole thing should get a lot easier. But when it comes to this, I've seen a lot of people saying, oh, this plan was never supposed to work, it's just a way to say, oh, hey, look, we tried and we can't do it. Well, I'm going to come at it from a different perspective. What if, yes, this particular flight was rushed, and the reason that it was rushed was to basically see where all the areas of attack came from on the policy, so that then you can see exactly which laws are affecting the government's ability to do its job in deporting people. Well, you've got your answer. Slavery Act, European Court on Human Rights lawyers, things of that nature. They've just shown you their targets. And so this is exactly what the government needs to repeal the Human Rights Act of 2008, or at least amend it, and do the same thing. Well, don't repeal the Modern Slavery Act, but amend the Modern Slavery Act. That's already given you 2 targets, and you didn't need to waste any time for it. You needed to waste £300,000, but that's probably cheaper than waiting a year, getting it already, and then when you get to next year, when you start the deportations, then you just get a load of legal battles again. You know, maybe it's the government just making the enemy show their hands. Obviously, I don't think this government is that competent. I don't think that's what they were necessarily going for. However, I don't think this was set up to intend to fail. I think we just have a government full of incompetent people. I don't see any reason to ascribe malice here, but everyone seems to be doing it. And then they all say, oh, it's because they all hate us. And to me, that's just really narcissistic. Why do you think the government cares about you? The government only cares about you for a vote. Why would they hate people who are going to vote for them? You're confusing hate with apathy. They're just apathetic. They don't care about you. They just want to get into power and then try and keep that power as much as they can. If politics is entirely incentives, you don't need very smart people in the House of Commons. If you did, we wouldn't see people like Angela Rayner there. So just keep giving MPs incentives to do what you want, i.e. send your MP letters saying, if you do this, that and the other, I can support the party and vote for you. Go to surgeries, talk to your MP about it. They do reply to emails. And obviously this is going to be a lot easier if you have an MP who isn't a wet Tory or from any other party. But really, when the Tories have an 80-seat majority, it is entirely down to people in the Tory MP constituencies to try and convince them to get the 80-seat majority to repeal Human Rights Act and do things like this. I do it myself, there's no reason you can't either. But the European Court of Human Rights was not the only foreign institution sticking its nose in this, although they actually have precedent to do it in the UK, because the UN funding could be the next casualty of Rwanda dispute. The UN's refugee agency said Rwandan migrants' plan breached Britain's international legal obligations, and obviously Priti Patel was not happy with that. Priti Patel will examine whether to cut funding to the UN after its intervention led to the grounding of the first deportation flight to Rwanda. European judges said that a highly critical legal analysis of the policy by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN's refugee agency, was a key driver in the court's 11th hour intervention. The agency said that the plan breached international legal obligations. The same critique had earlier been submitted to the UK's High Court. So the UN seems to be a slightly better target than the European Court of Human Rights, because it appears it was the UN passing on to the UK's High Courts, and presumably the lawyers as well, to try and interfere with the Rwandan plan, which is basically beneficial for absolutely everyone apart from the criminals. The government could now consider its funding of the organisation in light of the intervention, as well as repeated criticisms of UK immigration policy. A Whitehall source said, "We're looking into it. It's a lot of money to give to an organisation that spends so much time trying to undo our policies. They must have spent a fortune on lawyers for the role it has played in the courts over the last few days." Which is a good point. Why would you pay an organisation just so that they can pay other lawyers to cause problems for you, causing you to pay more money for your own lawyers? Doesn't make any sense. The source pointed out that any reduction could be hindered by existing collaborations with the body, which calls the UK a key donor and a strong advocate for the rights of refugees and other people of concern. Well, that's very good. Maybe part of doing that is sending illegal immigrants over to a place where they'll actually be welcomed instead. Last month, the Foreign Office said it was cutting foreign aid contributions to bodies such as the UN by billions in the coming years, and instead focusing on individual projects and countries, which makes it a lot more sense. Because when it's sent to the UN, they blow all the money on terrible projects, and there's not a lot you can actually do about it. Whereas when it's individual countries and projects, if an individual country or project isn't working, it's a lot easier to pull the funding and put it quickly into another individual project that's a lot better. It gives a lot more sovereignty to the UK when it's helping foreign countries and projects. Of course, you could fairly ask, well, why are we even sending money abroad anyway? And the real reason is incentives and politics, geopolitics even. The government wants to give money out to these countries, such as, let's say, most recently the Ukraine, so that we can get something beneficial back from them in the future. It's sort of an investment. It's probably part of the reason that Rwanda agreed to take in migrants from us, because we've probably given them some foreign aid in the past. British contributions to the UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, have almost halved from $134.7 million in 2020 to $72.9 million in 2021. UN data shows British contributions at $51.9 million so far this year, with $33 million embarked to tackle the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. The reductions coincide with Rishi Sunak's decision to cut the overseas aid budget from 0.7% of gross national income to 0.5% last year. UK aid spending was cut by £3 billion to about $11.5 billion. And this is a good thing, because in reality, foreign aid is actually a massive issue. It's basically just giving money out from poor people in the UK to rich people in the foreign countries. It doesn't really help the country as a whole, and a lot of the time it's basically just spent on bribes and to pay off militias and things like that. Individual projects are probably a lot better than actually giving it to the country's government. Like a lot of things, the free market's better. So there you go. For supporters of this Rwanda plan, of which I am one, unironically, we've been given at least our foreign targets when it comes to institutions trying to get in the way of this. And domestically, we've got a couple of targets with the Slavery Act and the Human Rights Act, both of which are laws that are very easy to spin as you're a terrible person if you want to get rid of these or amend them to have less powers. Because how easy is this? Oh, you want to get rid of human rights? Or you want to make slavery more legal? Yeah, you're gonna get a lot of that. Because people don't realise that the name of laws aren't necessarily reflective of what's in the laws. I mean, for God's sake, it's in the Coroner's Act that if you film porn while in any sort of school uniform, even if you're 58, then that's illegal within the United Kingdom. That's in the Coroner's Act. So while I say these are our targets, that doesn't mean repeal them. That means let's have a look at them and see if they need a bit of work done to them. And maybe to be fair, in the case of the Human Rights Act, if it is making foreign influence have sovereignty over this country, instantly just get rid of that bit, at the very least, or just repeal the whole law. I'd rather get rid of the whole law if that's the case. And if Pretty's plan was to rush this through to see what her targets were, then well done to her, but I have absolutely no evidence that that's what she intended, and I think she just got impatient. But she's probably one of the best people in the cabinet, so I'm not going to rag on her too much. And anyway, while I've been talking about all this, we should probably have an update as to the number of migrants crossing the channel. As you can see from this graph, 2019, it's a very low line at the bottom. 2020, oh, it starts to rise up a bit. Oh, 2021, man, look at that massive line going up. And this is all through the coronavirus, by the way. So now that the pandemic's over, you come to 2022, oh my god, the line's steeper than any of the others. And is anything helping? No. Would this migrant plan help? Maybe. But one thing's for sure, if all our plans to deal with this problem are completely undermined every single time, then guess what? That line's only gonna go steeper and steeper and steeper. Man, I would love to have 100% sovereignty back and be able for this government to actually do something about this issue, but can't do it. Just can't do it. So, yeah, I'm with them. Stop funding these key advocates that are going completely against this government. There's absolutely no use to it. And if these balls-ups continue, it's going to be a very difficult choice for me come next election, which is likely in 2024. Though I think I'll stick with the Conservatives. My local MP is actually one of the best that I have seen, so there you go. Let's hope something's done about this, because it is completely untenable to have tens of thousands of people crossing the channel illegally and then having them held in centres throughout the UK, because there have been problems with that. There's problems actually holding these illegal immigrants in their centres while they're being processed, because there's so many of them. So what's the answer? Oh, well, we need to spread the load a bit, send a load over to Rwanda, they want them. Oh, no, can't do that. So you've probably actually just made things worse for the migrants yet again. Yes, they don't want to go to Rwanda. Well, apparently they didn't want to leave their home. You know, beggars can't be choosers, I'm afraid. At least send them somewhere that wants them and can look after them better than in our detention centres, which some were considered unlawful. They were that bad. We can't house everyone, and the rate they're coming in is ridiculous. We probably do need these flights to go, because it's simply not fair, while we're going through a cost of living crisis as well, by the way, to keep putting all our tax money for these foreigners. It's just going to be a massive black hole for public spending. We need better solutions than this, and the UN keeps saying they gave us solutions, but I've not actually seen any of them. I don't know what their solutions were, and they never seem to publish anything about it. And if anyone's got anything that they've published about what to do about this migrant crisis, please send it to me, because I've googled around for it and I just can't find anything. So what the hell am I supposed to do? Because I'd love to see what the best solution to this problem is, and this Rwanda plan doesn't seem like it's the worst. Oh, but anyway, I could rant for hours with that. I think that's enough for this video. So, that's everything I had for you today. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.